Greetings and salutations, people there, Net Austin here. Last time, we dropped the first half of the Zenya Reboot breakdown. If you haven't seen the first part, I'll link it in the card above or the comments down below, since we're continuing directly where I stopped in the Pokedex last time. We had a strong first half of the region, and now it's time to end off even stronger. If you felt the first part didn't introduce enough new Pokemon, rest assured, the finale here has more new faces than in the first half. Without further ado, let's begin. So Launcher, the Sand Sniper Pokemon, starting off strong with the second Convergent species of the region, and basically just another redraw, at least for this stage. I really didn't change much with this redraw, essentially just fixing up the line work and the render. The design itself didn't change in any meaningful way worth talking about. What did change, however, was the ability Earth Ammo. Originally, it just powered up ground-type moves, but now it powers up rock and ground-type moves. It made more sense for me to include rock in here with all the sand and dirt this Pokemon eats and sifts through. Some rocks would be bound to be trapped up in there. So I thought that made for a more fitting ability. On the shiny front, I made the yellow a bit more saturated. While this stage didn't change very much, the evolution got a big update. Scoritzer, the Claw Cannon Pokemon. Originally, I was just going to redraw the OG version of this design, until someone brought up an interesting idea. Make the stinger into the cannon instead of the claw. I was intrigued, so I tried it out, and I gotta say, it was a lot better, despite being kind of a pain in the ass. First pass of the redesign got pretty close, but the pincer tail needed to be readjusted after an idea to have the back arm and the tail be more connected. After some back and forth, I had the back arm carrying the stinger like an RPG since the thing is just so damn heavy. I did have to rebalance the colors more than once during all of this, which was more of a hassle than I would have liked. Still, this is a really good update, so I can't complain too much. Camavan, the Desert Trek Pokemon. One of my favorite Pokemon from the OG region. This ride Pokemon didn't need any major changes, outside of just a better render overall. The line work was fairly simple to update. I did need to adjust the legs a bit more just to help them feel more balanced, but nothing drastic. On the color front, I made the orange fur just a bit darker and the yellow a touch brighter overall. That's about it in terms of changes for this absolute unit. This was one of the strongest designs in the OG region for a reason. Thun Rowdy, the Lightning Flail Pokemon. The first cross-gen evolution of the part, the Duskstone evolution method remained the same for our favorite Zebstrika evolution here. Now this Pokemon got a lot of updates, some needed ones as well since the OG was pretty underbaked. The biggest change out the gate was adding the white back into the color scheme. The gray accents of the original really took away a lot of the zebra-ness for this Pokemon, so I had to tone that down. Next, I made the horns a lot bigger to help feel more imposing. Plus, I needed to make this Pokemon feel less like a Mega Evolution and more like a proper evolution. I added the titular Lightning Flail tail say that's 5 times fast, after some feedback to be a real focal point of the design. Next, I reposed the Pokemon and adjusted some of the proportions, mainly with the head, to make it feel more powerful. Lastly, I fixed the color balancing with the addition of the white by adding just enough of the dark gray from the original on the Stormcloud fur on the legs, and alongside the ears and the muzzle. The shiny got an update with the introduction of the yellow, a vastly improved design overall. Blazuva, the Blazing Beak Pokemon. For my longtime fans, you might remember this Pokemon under a far worse name of Sunbeak. Yeah, not my most original name in hindsight. The biggest change out the gate was completely redoing the pose, since the original was as dull as a baseball bat. Now I have the Pokemon flying midair in a comparatively more dynamic pose. I made the pupils bigger, made the red accents dramatically darker for better contrast, and I made the yellow of the body, outside of the pupil, a lot duller since the palette was getting kinda hard to look at. Now, the name. Originally wasn't going to change the name at first, but I got one too many "this name sucks" comments, and I was sick of it. So, I changed the name. The Zuba part of the name comes from the Shona word for the sun. However, a name change and a redone pose wasn't the only thing this Pokemon got in the reboot. Solera, the Sun Raptor Pokemon. This evolves from Bazuba once exposed to a sunstone and is based on the Egyptian god himself, Ra. Fun fact, this was going to be a legendary Pokemon, but upon reflection, making it a normal Pokemon in the region felt correct. On top of that, Blazuba felt like a first stage Pokemon, so this was a win-win in my book. Now, the first sketch got the basics down for the pose and design, but the proportions of the wings, they did not carry over. Originally, the pose was going to be a lot more Yveltal-like, but it just didn't translate with this body plan. So I went with the more traditional bird Pokemon pose, and the rest was generally history. Color-wise, I did have to adjust the shade of blue so it didn't blend in with the black accents of the body, but other than that, this wasn't too hard. I had a lot of fun rendering the sun above its head, which took a fair amount of work to get how I wanted it to look, but hey, it was worth it. This looks fantastic. I imagine I don't need to explain why I gave this Pokemon Ignition for its ability. Emotkey, the Empath Pokemon. One of the few 3-stage Pokemon lines from the original. It's hard for me to keep a line going for a full 3-stage line, if you haven't noticed. This stage in particular got a good amount of changes. First off, I changed the pose entirely, now having the Pokemon standing on its much longer tail. I made the body more proportional. I changed the shape of the hands and then put them together like it was praying or meditating to feel more like a psychic type. I made the purple of the body a lot darker. With the shiny, I replaced the light gray with a bluish black for better contrast. Reboot, the Mind Reader Pokemon. The middle stage, by contrast of the first and final stages, didn't change much. Firstly, I flipped the canvas and kept the Pokemon at this perspective since I liked how it looked more. I had the little fangs poking out of the mouth to feel more intimidating. I changed the shape of the feet and the perspective on the hand on the ground. The original looked pretty awkward in that area. Lastly, I made the blue accents a bit brighter to help stand out more. The shiny got a complete overhaul, replacing the bright pink fur with the blue, keeping the bluish black from the Prevo, and making the pink skin a lot lighter. Bobylistic, the Soul Judge Pokemon. The Ectostone evolution method remains the same for this Pokemon. This arguably got more changes than the first stage here in the reboot. I changed the pose a lot, now having the tail feel more natural and not clasped in this Pokemon's hand like a bat. I made the ectoplasmic energy a lot bigger on the tail and forehead, changing that color to a light purple, removing the shade of blue entirely that this used to have. I changed the pose and perspective of the hand on our right, giving it kind of a bring it on pose. I made the blue hair lighter to stand out more like with Braboon. Ability-wise, I swapped out Forewarn with Anger Point to play into this Pokemon's wrathful nature. This is the 4th member of my in-game team. Parabite, the Larva Dragon Pokemon. One of my favorites from the original. This little spider-wasp larva didn't change a whole lot design-wise, but more proportion-wise. I made the torso a lot longer, and I made the neck thinner so the collar stood out more. I made the head and the tail spike a lot bigger, while shrinking said collar just a smidgen. Well, since the introduction of Dragon Eyes in Pokemon Champions made Arcane irrelevant, so I'll be phasing out the name Arcane in the future and just replacing it with the official ability, just FYI, and a little bit of housekeeping there. Just pretend it's Dragon Eyes right now. The shinies for this Pokemon line remain untouched. Vespa Drake, the Dragon Wasp Pokemon. Now, this one got some more noticeable changes, mainly in the posing. The original was boring, so I changed some things up in the new one, which took a few tries to get looking right. I made the tops of the antennae a lot bigger. I had the Pokemon leaning forward more, hopefully feeling a tad more dynamic. I made the claws more curved at the end for more piercing power. I made the stinger wider and more 3D for a better sense of scale and depth. The wings actually got a proper render, better matching other Pokemon with similar wings in my catalog and in official sources. As for the shiny, small lie, I did change this one. I replaced the black with a light purple. I wanted more of a change there, and not all shinies need black accents. Just most. Bellowart, the Warcry Pokemon. Alright, the first new line added in this half of the series. This line is based on Namakwa Rain Frogs, or the Warcry Frog if you've seen that video online. The first pass of this Pokemon sucked. There was nothing good about it. It was uninspired, boring, and lazy. The only things that contributed to the overall design were the sound wave / lightning bolt pattern on the back and the puffed up cheeks. A very kind, rough sketch was sent my way to help develop the body shape for this Pokemon. And oh my god, it helped so much. The next pass was basically the final product. From there, I had pretty smooth sailing. Rough start aside, this was a pretty fun Pokemon. Crocurrent, the Thunder Ribbit Pokemon. This Chungus evolves from Bellowart once exposed to a Thunderstone. I created this line for two reasons. Well, one shared reason. Type balancing. I needed more sound and electric type, so this was a win-win in my eyes. Oh, before I forget, the Stormcloud jaw / throat pouch was a fantastic suggestion someone threw out when I was brainstorming, and it was the perfect focal point of this design. The first pass got pretty close to where I needed it, outside of some minor perspective hiccups on the back feet. The colors themselves were pretty easy to knock out, even if I did have to go with a lighter shade of black for the jaw. All in all, I am really happy I added this line. P-Rock, the Royal Ore Pokemon. Our next cross-gen evolution, you might remember this guy as the evolved form of Fezsnob when it's traded holding a King's Rock. The original design was rough. The face was boring, the tail was too small, and the poses needed some overall tweaks. I used a lot of elements from Fezsnob's redesign from the Curia reboot for this Pokemon, mainly for the diamond around its eye. I made the tail a lot bigger, and I simplified the color scheme by removing one of the shades of blue that was in the original. I had to resize and adjust the tail multiple times to get it right. Easily the hardest part of the redesign, bar none. I made that little coif of hair up front a lot longer for a better silhouette. I also made the legs longer to better support its weight and feel more imposing as an evolution. It's not the biggest glow up of the region, but it's a pretty noticeable one. Snowmount, the Gravity Defier Pokemon. The resident mountain climber here didn't change too much, just cleaning up the line work and the color saturation more than anything. I did make the fur of the hat cover up more of the horns to feel more natural since the originals kinda looked glued on. I made the brown and the light blue a bit brighter, and I made the other metal accents a touch darker, not too much in that regard. This was one of the better Pokemon of the original, so it didn't really need to change all too much. Sky Spot, the common bird Pokemon. I moved this line down in the region to help spread some typings across the board and to have more variety of types per area. To say this line was the weakest of the original version is a reasonable take. The originals were dull or just plain awful. I decided to simplify the hell out of the original design and just make this thing an orb with a face, more than likely. I shrank the body, shifted the face over, made the legs a lot smaller, and I just made this a little round orb boy. I also added a little bit more of a curve to the wings just to help a bit more unique in the shape department. As simplistic as this design is, I will take this over the original any day of the week. Ivian, the surveillance Pokemon. Now the evolution here got some serious reworks. I despise the original version. It is the worst Pokemon, in my opinion, of the OG version of the Zenya region. I went with a more humanoid body plan for the design, tying more into the government agent motif a lot harder with the pose and the patterns. Originally, the beak was a lot more simplistic. The back wing was tucked in. It lacked the purple tips on the tail feathers, and the hair lacked the spike in the back. This once also had a more overt tie on its chest, but that got scrapped during development since it was too on the nose. I had to simplify this design more than one time until we got to where it needed to be. This is such a night and day difference that it is staggering. Oh, I also updated its ability to give it some sound type stab options with Echo, playing into the surveillance gimmick this Pokemon already had. Zenya Combi, the tiny bee Pokemon. Most of the changes come down to the line work and the expressions on each face for this Pokemon. I spent a lot of time making sure the design's line work and perspective was a lot cleaner and more lined up with one another. Once the line work was up to snuff, I went to work on the faces. I had the idea to make each face have a unique expression, and naturally, it added a lot of personality to this Pokemon where it had lacked it prior. I also made the diamonds at the end of the antenna a lot bigger to catch the eye easier. The rest of this Pokemon is the same, so this is just a solid update all around. Zenya Vespiquen, the beehive Pokemon. For the female evolution, I decided to lean into the missile launcher inspiration that the male evolution has, just with bigger artillery. The original version had one stinger at the end, whereas this time around, I gave it 4 to feel even more imposing. The thorax took the longest time to get the perspective figure out. That was a major headache on my part. I also added another band around the thorax to help break up the colors. I made the waist and the head bigger, added the yellow dots on the shoulders and the claws just to help the color balancing. I shrank the wings a touch while making them a bit of a darker blue. I replaced Pressure with Queenly Majesty, which seems self-explanatory why. This isn't a perfect update. These added stripes on the thorax are a bit rough, but it's a solid one all around. Drone Bustion, the Rocket Stinger Pokemon. Okay, the male evolution for Zenya Combi didn't get as big of an update, but there's at least something to talk about. Most of the update comes down to a pose change and a much better render. I brought down both rocket launcher arms to aim at the camera, both for a more dramatic pose and to feel more intimidating, like it's just about to air out the block. I had the thorax be pointing down as opposed to having it off to the side like I did in the original for whatever fucking reason I did at the time. I gave the missiles and the stinger a much better superheated render, even if that could have been a touch better in hindsight. I made the darker red accents even darker for better contrast. The shiny also got an update, replacing the black with a grayish white. This is the better of the two gender evolutions in my opinion, but not by a wide margin. Shrew Winter, the Snow Sniffer Pokemon. I decided to move the ice type slash mountain Pokemon to the middle-ish of the region and mix things up, and so people could actually use an ice type reasonably in the middle of the game here. In terms of changes, this is more or less a redraw. The only thing I did was make its sniffer a bit bigger and change the curl of the tail. That's about it. Everything else is more or less the same as the original, just better. I did overhaul the shiny though, replacing the gray with the purple, the blue with the dark purple, and the light blue with a gray. Nothing major with this one, I'm sorry. Snowdert, the scuttling snowball Pokemon. Now I actually got something to talk about with this one. I redid the proportions for this one, making the abdomen a lot smaller and shrunk the legs to be more proportional. I also changed the shape of said legs to look like snowballs at the end to be more in line with the rest of the body and to make it more unique when put up against its evolution. I fixed the awful ice crystal on the back. The shiny is more or less the same, just with a brighter bluish green for the eyes and feet. Lizambush, the snow trap Pokemon. The evolution method actually got an update, now requiring an ice stone to evolve. Don't do a whole lot of those, so it felt fun. This Pokemon got a near complete redesign. I knew I wanted to redesign the original version of this Pokemon, with the igloo acting as cover and as a pseudo jacket for this big old boy. The first pass almost got this perfectly, but alas, some things didn't survive the design process. At one point, this had a giant ice crystal on top of its back, but that got scrapped late in development, sadly. It ruined the illusion I wanted this thing to have. Also, this kind of looked bad. The ice blue color was a lot more saturated for a while, but I eventually had to tone that down since it popped way too much. Overall, I am super happy with this redesign. It was very much needed. The shiny colors are more or less the same, just with the purple of the main body being a lot brighter. Icena, the Snowpack Pokemon. This one is mostly a redraw with a few minor changes. I made the head slightly bigger for one, just to help it feel a touch more baby-like. I flipped the canvas so it was facing the opposite direction, just because I liked that angle more for this Pokemon. I fixed the awful rendering on the icy sections of the body. Lastly, I turned the skin tone purple for more color variations with the ice types in this section of the map. Shiny-wise, I made the blue a touch darker and made the skin tone more of a prominent gray opposed to the lighter rendition of the original. I traded out Snowcloak for Savage Snow to play into this Pokemon's vicious nature when it evolves. Speaking of which, Glacialpha, the Snowpack Pokemon. This changed a bit less than Icena did in hindsight, mainly coming down to color changes. I replaced the bluish black with the purple from Icena. Outside of the significantly better ice render, this is more or less the same. The shiny changes boiled down to replacing the white with black, which I actually thought stood out more for this one. Sorry this entry is short, there just really was nothing to talk about. Squayananny, the childcare Pokemon. The next new Pokemon added to the region, this lovely lady is based on angel sharks and babysitters/caregivers. The first pass got all of the major elements down, just missing some of the minor details and getting the shapes to be more consistent size-wise. I wanted more fairy types in my region and I thought this would be a fun addition. I did have to flip the tail fin upside down to be more in line with actual angel sharks, and I thought it just made for something a little bit more interesting compared to my other shark Pokemon. This took me a few passes to get the shapes consistent and to iron out the color scheme. Once that was taken care of, this was no issue. Fun fact, the tan of the shiny was originally the main color for the base Pokemon, but I changed things up after some feedback. Poriferola, the tiny sponge Pokemon. Okay, our last Convergent Pokemon of the region. This tiny sea sponge only got some minor updates. I made the pink coral brighter to stand out more, while making the light yellow insides a touch more saturated. The hair, I guess for lack of a better term, got larger, and the feet got a bit wider towards the ends. This stage changed the least out of the entire line, being pretty much a redraw, but it really didn't need major changes, so it kind of evens out for me. Old Reef, the mobile reef Pokemon. This stage didn't change that much either in hindsight, mainly coming down to color saturation and making the holes across the body a bit more 3D. I made the darker orange legs brighter since the original was too dark and it felt a little distracting. I made the leg on our left a touch bigger. I made the eyes closer to that of Boldor. I made the coral across the top of this Pokemon more 3D looking and integrated into the body since the original just kind of felt glued on haphazardly. For the shiny, I made the purple legs darker since they were a little bit too pale, and blended in with the torso more than I liked when looking back at the original. Coralith, the toxic filter Pokemon. It took until the end of the line, but I finally have something to really talk about. This stage changed the most out of the entire line. The first thing I did was make this Pokemon a lot taller to stand out more compared to Gigalith, and I wanted to mix things up proportion-wise. For the sake of color balancing, I removed the light yellow from the inside of the holes on the legs. I made the blue darker and the yellow brighter for better contrast, something that took a while to get a good shade for both of them. Oh, I also made the green seaweed more vivid to help draw in the eye. I added dead sections on the end of the red coral to play into this Pokemon's lore and typing as just well to add a little bit of flair to the design, you know? The legs took a while to get down. Hell, the entire design took a hot minute now that I think about it, but despite the hassle, this is still the best Convergent Pokemon in the entire region. Lacrusta, the ancient pistol Pokemon. Okay, this one was fun to work on. This line is based on Tiger Pistol, Shrimp, and handguns, with this stage being based off of a flintlock pistol. Yeah, I forgot about Clawitzer when I was doing this line, so I lampshaded the issue with the Dex entry since I didn't want to scrap this idea since I thought it was too much fun. I had the idea to base it off of an old British game hunter, so that's where the mustache and the crosshair monocle came in from. I had to make the lines on the pupil a lot thicker to feel more natural after some feedback there. The flintlock claw took a few tries, but I got it down in time. In hindsight, I do wish to have changed up the shiny a bit more. The blue is a nice touch, but I think I could have done more. I gave it galvanized to play into the electrical charge motif of the eyes without making it an electric type in the present region, but it was an electric type at one point in history, just for some clarification. Snap Pistol, the Trigger Claw Pokemon. Now the evolution here gave me a lot of trouble. Originally, this was bipedal with a huge upper body, a big scope eye, and a much more boring pose. I didn't like that pass, so I decided to make it a pseudo-centaur. That pose wasn't much better, but the overall package was improving, so I decided to have it on its back legs, rearing up at the player and the camera. This pass with the pose didn't take it far enough, so I had to redo it again. The next pass got the legs in a good spot, but the gun claws were boring. I had to repose them more than a few times, especially to get the perspective right. It certainly took way longer than I would have liked to get this design down, but damn it, this is a fantastic addition to the region, and this is the 5th member of my in-game team. Sharkdrill, the Invisible Jaw Pokemon, a classic of the region. This unit wasn't bad in the original version, but it needed some work. The change I wanted to make the most with this Pokemon was to its bulk, making it a lot chonkier. The original was way too skinny for a great white shark, and it lacked the sheer tank build that helps make them such a menace in nature. So I buffed up the Pokemon, shrank the eye to make it feel bigger, made the tail longer, and I simplified the spot patterns across the body. I added the fish skeleton / soul in the stomach after some feedback and back and forth discussion, and I'm really glad I did. It's a really good focal point for the design. I gave it Vanishing Act for the primary ability to play into the partial invisibility this Pokemon is known for, and I think it's a fun ability that I give out sparingly, naturally. Dombocto, the delicacy Pokemon. Not much to say with this one. Our favorite Dombolo dumpling squid here didn't need that much of a change going into the reboot. Honestly, didn't have any major issues whatsoever. It's basically just a redraw. Honestly, the biggest issue I had was remembering the correct term for the dumplings I used as the base, since I misspelled it the first go around and needed to do some research to find the correct term. A solid food mon, but nothing special. I really do need to do more food mons in the future. Quillhaka, the poison balloon Pokemon. Okay, we've finally arrived at this one. As I said in the classic Zenya video, Quillhaka was the worst evolution added in that version of the region. It was terrible on every conceivable level, so I had my work cut out for me. The first pass got the overall vibe I wanted down, but the perspective of the stomach spikes were off and had to be fixed in later passes. Yes, before anyone says anything, I'm aware what this Pokemon looks like if you take the spikes off. It was too funny to change after the fact. Anywho, the tail was also a bit more square in earlier passes, but I went back and gave it more of a curve later on. I added the toxic sludge patterns to help break up the design and make it more eye-catching. I made the pink from the OG version lighter for better color contrasts. Naturally, the spikes took the longest time to get right with this Pokemon. I changed the ability to Toxic Debris. It felt way more thematic for this Pokemon than Intimidate. Overall, a solid update for what was an objectively terrible Pokemon. Submergi, the alien sub-Pokemon. We got back-to-back new Pokemon coming up, so strap in. This one is based on the barrel eye fish and UFOs. The first pass was plain, and kind of looked like Old Man Jenkins from SpongeBob, weirdly enough. The eye/aliens were originally separated into two pilots. The body wasn't pushed far enough, and all in all, it was just lacking. So I started adding more details to the body, eventually coming up with the jet propulsion fins, even if those would change shape during development. A sketch sent my way really helped iron out this design, mainly adding the pilot with the eyeball hair buns, the two spotlight eyes up front, and the shape of the tail fin. From there, the design mostly came together nicely. Still had to adjust the eyes here and there. The render on that area took a hot minute. I decided to bring back Idle Shift since I know that this Pokemon isn't fast, and having an instant Trick Room is just fun. Barkenom, the Dragon Star Pokemon. Scratching that kaiju itch, the first of two new monster-based lines. This bad boy is based on the Barum from Rebirth of Mothra 2. I hadn't heard of this kaiju before, never seen the Rebirth trilogy, something I need to fix. So, a brand new dragon-type line just seemed perfect. More unconventional dragon types are always a good thing. The first pass got the very basic design down. It's not super complicated anyway, so this didn't have any major issues. The only thing I added after the fact were the scales. Granted, I had to severely cut down on them in following passes. I went overboard initially. The scales between the eyes are also kind of meant to be a pseudo-woo face, FYI. I gave it junk food since kaiju in the movies ate pollution. This Pokemon didn't give me much issue, all in all. The evolution, on the other hand, Drastara, the Dragon Star Pokemon. This nightmare of Altenbar was exposed to a Sky Stone and is based on Dagara from the same movie. This Pokemon was a bitch to design. The first iteration was a lot closer to the source material, just with a more jet-like body. The next pass ditched the tiny arms it had and leaned more into a jet motif, but it looked awful. However, after the ever-helpful shower thought clarity, the current design was born. I went back to more of a starfish body plan, just with bigger wings and a tail. I added the back spike after the fact, and the design was perfected from there. I did have to adjust some of the color shades here and there, but nothing major. I love this Pokemon, but I do need more typing variation with my Kaiju going into the future. See what I can do there. Hevlin, the Rock Egg Pokemon. The next two entries are going to be very short since they're essentially just redraws with a few minor tweaks. I brought the shell down further onto the head, now acting and looking like a proper helmet. I fixed the shape of the egg to be a little bit smoother, and I added some more floof on the body, and just gave it a much, much better render on the shell. Other than that, this is essentially the same as the OG version. Pingrock, the Stone Weights Pokemon. Second burst, same as the first. The first change I actually did was make the tail a bit more pronounced, and that's it. The line work needed a lot of updates to not look like complete dog shit. However, the shiny did actually get an update, replacing the gray rock accents with the reddish brown. Nothing else really changed with this line. They were solid enough as they were. Zenya Region, the Lying Hound Pokemon. A brand new and the last regional variant we have, as well as another connective tissue to the Nassau region. Until I do a DLC for said region in the future. This line is based off of the African fable, the Jackal and the Spring, with this being the titular Jackal and where the water type comes from. This wasn't a super complicated design, essentially just making the original Jackrule have more rounded shapes, an emo cut, and a blue color scheme. Bangs and the tail did take a few tries to get just right. I really do love doing regional variants in my own Pokemon. It's always fun for me. I do wish I had chosen a different eye color for the shiny in hindsight. Onisad, the Trickster Spider Pokemon. One of my favorites from the original region. Our favorite Anansi boy here did not change much, but the updates it did get were solid. I had the Pokemon a bit more hunched over, laughing even harder at whatever it just did to somebody. I spread the legs out a little bit more for some proper balance. I also made the blue skin a lot darker, same with the pink for that matter, while I made the gold accents lighter. I made the hair stick up just a little bit more, and that was about it. Ability-wise, I swapped Illusion and Vital Spirit's placements. Since Illusions are this Pokemon's whole gimmick, it really should have been the primary. The shiny didn't change much, just making the red a lot darker. Still, this is a solid-ass Pokemon. Fantis, the Spirit Sickle Pokemon. This lovely lady got a big update in the reboot. One it frankly needed in hindsight. The first changes came down to making the claws resemble those of Lurantis more, and I quote, help Lurantis get some of its drip back, unquote, by making the legs look more like Hakama pants. I repositioned the claws to feel a little bit more dynamic. I made the curled hair on the side and the crown a bit bigger, increased the leg size, redid the patterns completely on them, and changed the eye color to purple since I just thought it was prettier. Oh, I also had to fix the petal skirt around the waist since The OGs kind of looked like it was just glued on more than anything else. Lastly, I updated the spirit bow on the back so it stood out from the rest of the Pokemon. The shiny got an update as well, replacing the white with black since that popped more, making the purple darker for the same reason. All in all, this is now a fantastic evolution in my book. Tango, the Spore Husk Pokemon. The other kaiju line I added in the reboot. This stage is based on Tango from the 1963 movie of the same name. I hadn't heard about this kaiju / movie before someone had brought it to my attention, and making more mushroom Pokemon is never a bad thing in my book. This was super simple to get down, so I did not have any major issues. I mainly just exaggerated the yellow bulb / pustules on the body to help give it some more body, pun intended. I flipped the canvas, and the rest was more or less good to go from there. I love the shinies for this line, easily some of the best in the entire reboot. I brought back Mushroom Patch with the ability since it felt thematically fitting for this line. Goldigus, the Mushroom Titan Pokemon. This mountain of a mushroom here is based on the most recent kaiju / titan from the Monsterverse, Yugoth, from the Return to Skull Island comic series, a sequel to the cancelled Netflix anime. When I saw this titan, I knew I had to do something with it. So I waited for a few issues to come out so I could get the cliff notes from the many Godzilla YouTubers I follow to build a solid foundation for this Pokemon. As you can see on screen, Yugoth really doesn't have a face since it's a golem of earth and mushrooms that can meld into the area around it. So I had to work around that. So I used the same trick with the bulbs from Tango to act as this thing's eyes, and used some of the fungus as a pseudo beard / mouth underneath it. I knew I wanted this thing to be very asymmetrical to play into the construct aspect of this monster. No major issues once the body was sorted out. The color scheme fell into place fairly quickly. I really love the addition of the white. I think that adds a lot. Once again, this is a peak shiny in my opinion. Storkill, the Slide Beak Pokemon. I love Shoebill Storks, so I have a soft spot for this line, even if the original design sucked. They were just blue birds, more or less, without much to make them into Pokemon. So, after some brutal feedback, I decided to lean into the deceit part of their nature and make them look more non-threatening to lower their target's guard. So, I made this Pokemon look nicer, more refined, like a distinguished gentleman. But I made the feather at the end of their wing more blade-like to play into the assassin motif and work better into Steelworker as one of their abilities. I changed up the classification to reflect their new temperament and personality. The shiny got a complete overhaul since the originals sucked. I replaced the tan with a nice purple here, kept the black sections the same color, and added some nice light blue accents to pop. Trechawing, the false noble Pokemon. For the evolution here, I had one goal for it. Turn this thing into a James Bond villain. So, I changed the shape of the beak, shrank the scar over the eye, changed the eye shape while I was at it, gave it a more defined torso and back. I redid the wings completely so they actually looked anatomically correct and functional while keeping the knife imagery from Storkill's redesign. I changed up the chest pattern so the bow tie wasn't so obvious, and lastly, I made the feet more defined and intimidating looking. Color-wise, I added more of the pink accent across the body since it felt underutilized in the original. I changed the tail feathers to blue so they didn't get lost up in the torso when looking at the design. Once again, the shiny got a complete overhaul. I replaced the light blue with purple. I made the pink more of a magenta, and I replaced the red with a light pink. A huge improvement in every regard for this line. Dragleon, the color scale Pokemon, the final evolution added in this region. The evolution method remains the same, learning Dragon Rage at level 40. Fixing the proportions were the biggest thing I needed to fix with this redesign, making this a thick boy. The first pass got the overall body plan down, but the face was terrible and the tail was way too small. After a few tweaks and redesigns, I made the tail a lot bigger, shrank the eye, and I opened up the mouth, in addition to adding these scales across the body to help eliminate some of the negative space. The colors took a minute to iron out. I had to make that purple a lot darker to balance out the shades and hues. I actually simplified a lot of the colors, making each section of the pattern across the body take up more space. The shiny is more or less the same, except I removed the green entirely and replaced it with light blue. Sleepant, the lethargic snake Pokemon. The sleepiest noodle in the world here. Didn't change much, but damn were they needed. I mainly repost this Pokemon since the original committed the sin of being a near profile view, so I had the tail curled up around itself a bit more, which is admittingly more of a generic snake pose, but it works more than the original did, so I'll take it. I made the blanket-like folds on its body bigger so it looked like a little kid wrapped up with a blanket around their shoulders, half asleep to the world around them. I removed the red eye from the color scheme and just made it green for simplicity, since the original color palette was getting a bit too bloated with it. I changed the shiny a bit, just replacing the light purple accents of the original with the more plum you see here. Narcoleaftic, the slumbering snake Pokemon. The leaf stone evolution method remains the same. Moving on. This one didn't change too much, mainly just adjusting the perspective of the pattern across the body. I did make the head a little smaller to feel more like an evolved Pokemon, and I added the Z-shaped tongue like it was counting Z's. I thought it was clever. Getting the patterns down was easily the hardest part of the redesign, but after blood, sweat, and a lot of swearing, I got it. The only change to the shiny was making the green darker overall. Nothing special, but a solid update. Koi Trio, the Lost Treasure Pokemon. Alright. The last regular line of the region, once more. Our Mansa-Musa line got some pretty big changes overall, but let's start with the new ability first. The original ability, Pure Gold, was lackluster, so I updated the effects to include the electric type buff since Gold is actually a great insulator of electricity. So I also had to change up the name after some feedback to what you see here. Now, as for the design, the overall package didn't change, but the proportions and the perspectives certainly did. The original was so boring in terms of posing, so I made sure to have each coin in a different position, which is a real pain in the ass, I can tell you. I made the face of each coin overall smaller so the details inside them weren't so smushed. I changed the shade of gold for the design since the original was a bit too muted. I also changed the shiny from the classic silver to more of a bronze. I felt that was more unique for this stage. Carapace, the treasure shell Pokemon. The evolution method of using Payday 20 times in battle remains the same. Now this boy got some serious updates, and oh my god, they were needed. The original wasn't terrible, but it wasn't pushed nearly far enough. Fixing the proportions was the first thing on the agenda for this Pokemon, especially with the treasure chest claws. I actually took a lot of inspiration from Brainstorm from Ben 10 Alien Force, mainly with the shape of the upper torso. I made the eyes smaller, the legs thicker, the arms much bigger, and I made the gold bar smile more pronounced and 3D. I did try to give it an old-fashioned crown, but it just didn't work, so I eventually added the purple gem on top after some back-and-forth feedback. Lastly, I fixed up the gold coins in their claws so it didn't look like a giant, formless jumble. I did keep the silver for this shiny, but I made the dark gray sections black and kept the treasure chest the same color, and brought in the bronze color from Koi Trio's new shiny. A huge update, if I do say so myself. Kintrone, the stone spike Pokemon. Revived from the spike fossil, this lad didn't change too much going into the reboot, mainly because it didn't need to. I smoothed out the top of the head for cleaner line work, I repositioned the feet to face the actual correct direction, and I added the patterns on the sides to break up the empty space after some feedback. I do wish I had tried harder to make this more of a 3/4 view in hindsight, but what's done is done. The shiny is the exact same with the exception of the eye color, now being a vivid yellow to pop more. Kentrospike, the Spike-back Pokemon. The evolution here got a much needed facelift here in the reboot. I moved the shoulder spikes forwards on the body and made them a lot bigger, adding some patterns from Kentron to help break up the empty space. I fixed the leg perspective and proportions to better support this Pokemon's weight. I gave it a steel helmet to look more armored and defensive, changing the color of that shade of metal across the body while I was at it. Hell, I basically darkened every color on here with the exception of the tan for the skin, since the original was so washed out. I made the back spikes more 3D looking as well for a better sense of depth, and that's about it. The shiny got an update as well, removing the darker brown accents, moving the lighter brown in their place, and then adding black where the light brown used to be. Honestly, it's a toss-up which of the final fossil stages got the bigger glow-up. Spinosnow, the Arctic Hunter Pokemon. Revived from the Spine fossil, this stage definitely changed more than its counterpart did. So with this redesign, I wanted to tap into the more generally accepted, scientifically accurate version of the Spinosaurus as we know it today. So I changed the area where the legs meet the tail, making the tail look overall a lot bigger. I gave it more defined hands, and I changed up the shape of the feet. I did have to redo the tail a few times to get it to where it is here now. The original pass was too empty and it felt a little uninspired. I made the back fin more defined, and I added the scales across the body to help break up the empty space once again. I made the snout a bit more pronounced, and lastly, I made the purple a shade darker. Shiny-wise, I replaced the white accent with the current green. Brozosaurus, the Arctic Hunter Pokemon. For the evolution, I made the tail a lot bigger for starters, playing into the more aquatic nature we now know the Spinosaurus to have had. I also made the tail curl the other way around and gave it more definition. I thought this made a stronger silhouette. I changed the shape of the feet and the hands once more, making the webbing more pronounced while I was at it. I brought the head and neck down a little bit more on the body, pose-wise. I opened up the mouth for a more interesting silhouette, while changing the brow shape and adding that patch over the nose for some color balancing. Lastly, I gave the stripe pattern more of a curve to it. I thought it was less static this way. Shiny-wise, the only thing I replaced was the white, now having a nice blue in its place. I vastly prefer this version of the Pokemon compared to its original. Scorching Shell, the Paradox Pokemon. Alright, time for the Paradox Pokemon. We're in the home stretch now. This one didn't need to change all that much outside of an updated render and a few visual tweaks. I updated the color scheme a bit, mainly just making the eyelids blue, adding the red mascara that the past Paradoxes have, and adding more lava inside the shell side vents. Nothing much else changed with the basic design. What did change came down to the render of the smoke and the area underneath it. I had to recolor the line work where the smoke meets the body to make that feel more believable. The shiny remained absolutely the same. It was too good to change. Twin Terror, the Paradox Pokemon. Our Paradox Doduo/Dodrio got some much needed bulk as the main change going into the reboot. I made the legs vastly thicker since they're running all over the place. I made the wings a bit more pronounced, changed the shape of the chest plumage, added some black at the base of the tail feathers and at the tips of the beaks, changed the eye color to yellow to make them more unique, and lastly, once again, added the red mascara. Oh, I also made the feathers on the head a lot poofier, so it had a more unique silhouette after some feedback regarding the shape language of this Pokemon. Once again, the shiny remains unchanged. Bellowing Spike, the Paradox Pokemon. Perspective issues plagued the original version of this Pokemon more than anything else, so that's what I wanted to fix most with this Paradox to Titan. So I made the Pokemon more of a 3/4 view, making it closer to Titan anyway. I changed the body color to match our favorite land whale more. I made the eyes smaller, and I curved the central fins a little bit more. I made the tips of the second set of fins pink for some color balancing, and actually made the tail fins a little bit smaller. The render took a hot minute to iron out since the OG's was a little too dark for its own good. The shiny is more or less the same, just replacing the yellow with red and keeping the eyes themselves the same color as opposed to making them light blue. Savage Shroom, the Paradox Pokemon, a personal favorite of mine. This Paradox Breloom didn't need to change a whole lot. I know I've said that for every past Paradoxmon so far, but it was really only the future ones I seriously screwed up with. Firstly, I made the mushroom cap bigger, redid the eyes to include the yellow that all the past Paradoxes have in some form or fashion, swapped out the bulbs on the back for pure vegetation after some feedback to look like feathers on a velociraptor, which this is modeled around if you couldn't tell. But the big change came down to making the legs a lot bulkier. Well, not a big change, but more noticeable, I suppose. I promise I'll have more to talk about with the future Paradoxmons, but before we get there, we have one new face to talk about real quick. Hidden Apex, the Paradox Pokemon. The first brand new Paradox Pokemon added to the reboot, this Paradox K Draco is based on Gustav the Crocodile. This was the Pokemon I alluded to with Sobite's recolor in the first video. Go check that out if you need more context. For those who don't know, Gustav is an infamous Nile crocodile who is said to have killed over 200 people before supposedly dying of old age. This was too good of a reference not to use, so I looked at my own catalog to see what I could turn into a Paradox Pokemon, and K Draco fit the bill perfectly. First pass got the general body plan and pose down, but I didn't push it far enough, mainly with the face, so I massively lengthened the jaws to make them more dynamic looking. The render wasn't too hard. Funny story about the shiny. It's actually a reference to Leviathamon from Digimon after someone made an offhand comment about the design. It's not an exact one-to-one, but the red and light blue went too hard, so I decided why not. I love this Pokemon, and I'm really happy I added it and its future Paradox counterpart to the region. Iron Spark, the Paradox Pokemon. To say I fumbled my first attempts at future Paradox Pokemon would be a mastery of understatement. The first couple were a complete travesty. The original for this one being the absolute worst. This needed a complete redesign head to toe, more or less. I wanted to keep the Tesla ball motif with this Pokemon going into the redesign, so I shrank the dome covering its head, removed the LED ice cube face and just had the normal face visible, redid the eyes to what you see here. I extended the neck to give this Pokemon more of an identity, and I thought it helped mix things up silhouette-wise. I did have to make the neck skinnier during development for a stronger design. I made the antenna a lot bigger, and I made the limbs more robotic looking in 3D. A night and day difference between the versions. I'm actually happy to acknowledge this Pokemon's existence now. Iron Petals, the Paradox Pokemon. Naturally, the second worst future Paradox Pokemon I ever did. This future Sunflora also needed a lot of work, but not as much work as Iron Spark did. I redid the titular petals, making them more into solar panels and removing the Paradox glowy energy bullshit around them just to make this look a little bit more unique. This easily took the longest time in the redesign process, made the face a bit more detailed with the yellow lines going down on either side of the screen face. I needed to make the stomach area more defined, now having a cleaner separation from the neck. I gave the arms some actual definition instead of being flatter than cardboard. Lastly, I made the tops of the legs a little bit thicker so the roots/tendrils just didn't merge into the top of the leg. I redid the shiny now that I actually understand how future Paradox shinies work. It's not as big of a glow up, but it is one nonetheless. Iron Gatling, the Paradox Pokemon. Okay, I didn't hate the original version of this Pokemon. I think this is where I started getting the handle on future Paradoxes, but the design still needed some work. I had the idea to make the arms floating mid-air. I just thought it would make the design more interesting and allow for more unique animations in my head. Plus, it may or may not be an unintentional One Piece reference with a new name in hindsight, even if I did not come up with the name, sadly. Besides detaching the arms, I made the shoulders a lot bigger so they could spin in place and fling the fists forward at their opponents. I made the legs more detailed and defined, along with the belt while I was at it. I made the head fins a bit more pronounced, and that was roughly it. This didn't need a complete redesign to be good, it just needed some tweaks. Iron Brain, the Paradox Pokemon. Like with Iron Gatling, this didn't need a complete overhaul. Just enough to make the Pokemon more interesting. The bulb/domes on the back containing the energy were a suggestion made before I started drawing it, which I'm glad they did since this added a lot to the design and especially the silhouette. I made the antenna bigger while I was at it. For the rest of the body, I made the groin area more defined since the OG's was flat as hell. I fixed the proportions on the back limbs and slightly tweaked the color balance by adding the black dividers on the legs. This is still far from my favorite future Paradox Pokemon, but I think this is still a solid one. Iron Ballad, the Paradox Pokemon. The second brand new Paradox Pokemon, this future Paradox Siren is based on heavy metal bands. I chose Siren since I wanted to do 2 more sound-type Paradox Pokemon, and this felt like it would fit the bill for a future Paradox way better than a past one. The first pass got all the major elements and posing down. I just had to give it the rock-on pose. I added the speaker on the chest later into development. Color-wise, this once had bright white teeth, but that changed after the fact since they were just way too distracting. I did have to make the pupils bigger as well since they kept getting lost in the design. I had to change the skin tone from a metallic blue to black to better fit in with the rest of the future Paradoxes. The hair was easily the hardest thing to nail down with this design. Those needed more than a few passes to be acceptable. This was a fun Paradox to add to the region. Sileocon, the Desert Cat Pokemon. Alright, we've finally reached the pseudos of the region once more. Besides fixing the paws, just making them bigger overall, I also made the collar around the neck a bit more pronounced since the originals felt too flat after getting some feedback. The biggest change, however, came down to the tail. I changed the shape entirely to resemble an ancient Egyptian scepter. I really wish I had come up with that idea, but alas, I did not. The rest of the design did not need to change. It was just pretty good as is. The silhouette is a lot stronger now on this tiny little baby. Desphinx, the Sandlord Pokemon. This changed slightly more than the first stage. I added the scepter tail from Sileocon's redesign, trying to keep that at least for this stage. But I have it slightly more outstretched as it unfurls the more it evolves. I made the front legs smaller since someone asked the question if this Pokemon could even walk if it was standing upright. Something I doubt the original could, looking back on it. I made the beard a bit more 3D, not by much, mind you. I made the red accents more of a maroon, keeping that color from the Prevo as well. Lastly, on the color front, I made the darker brown a few shades darker as well while I was at it. Terriddle, the Winged Lion Pokemon. The final stage to the line, this got a lot more changes than I remember doing. I gave the Pokemon a slight pose change, making it look down on the player now and bringing the tail down near the legs. I removed the red balls around the end of the tail to help simplify the design, doing the same for the front legs. I greatly simplified the chest pattern since the original was way too busy for its own good. I redid the wings so the brown feathers were more stylized and interesting to look at, and I made the blue closer to lapis and the red brighter for some color contrast and to fix some of the lingering saturation issues of the original. The render wasn't super hard, so no notes there. Terriddle remains one of the best pseudos in my catalog and is the final member of my in-game team. Noble Flame, the Paradox Pokemon. Our final past Paradox Pokemon, and what may be the best one I have still ever done. This Paradox Arcanine didn't need to change much outside of the better render. The first thing I did was flip the canvas in order to suss out any lingering issues from the original before I redrew it. Once those were ironed out, I added the yellow to the eyes to keep them in line with the other past ones. The big change came down to the render on the energy orbs and the tail. I completely redid them so they stood out more and had more implied movement to them, while adding these swirls on the tail to keep that shape language a little bit more consistent. Rendering these sections was a lot of fun and only enhanced a great Pokemon design. Iron King, the Paradox Pokemon. Okay, final Paradox of the region. And unlike its counterpart, this got some more noticeable changes. The first thing were the energy claws, being a fun suggestion someone made during a brainstorming session. The original suggestion were full-on energy limbs with a mechanical bit on the inside, but I wasn't vibing with it despite liking it as a fun idea. Outside of that, I made the legs a touch more intricate, making them a little bit closer to Tyrantrums. I made the face more defined, the tail more segmented, and I messed with the color balancing a little bit. Speaking of the colors, I made the red and grays a lot darker, since the original, once again, was way too washed out, going with a nice hot rod red. Now, this feels like a proper Paradox boss. Hydnara, the Parasite Cage Pokemon. Keeping on my promise to have more mythical Pokemon, this is still an odd one. This nightmare is based on the Hydnora, a parasitic plant that attaches to others' roots. I wanted one more grass type for the region, plus having more type diversity and mythicals is good, and this was weird enough to catch my interest. The first pass was pretty solid all around. I knew I didn't want to give this thing any limbs, and I thought the idea of this thing having to flip upside down to bury itself was too damn funny. But the dress/mouth was really fun to do, really giving some big Mawile vibes. In the following passes, I did have to simplify the hair by toning down the number of nubs on their ponytail, I guess, for lack of a better word. Color-wise, this was pretty easy. The only thing I really had to do was go with a less aggressive orange for the accent colors. I rebranded Triage, Sue Me. The reason this Pokemon has stench because apparently the IRL flower smells like shit, and I thought that was too funny not to keep for this Pokemon. Marine Beat, the Music Bringer Pokemon. Okay, a brand new legendary, and the last new Pokemon added to the reboot. This is based on the music goddess Marimba and giraffes. She acts as the peacekeeper for the desert trio. I based a lot of her body off of African musical instruments, her horns being shakers, her neck being a marimba, the legs being drums, etc. The first pass wasn't awful, but it looked like it had a bunch of stuff glued onto its body, and it just kind of sucked. The second pass got everything but the legs and the color scheme down. The original color scheme was an eyesore. I had to reposition the legs a few times to get a proper sense of balance if you were looking from this Pokemon from the top down. But I'll be honest, the more I worked on it, the more pissed off I was getting. Eventually, I got the drum leg idea, if just to make my life easier. They worked a lot better, but I did have to redo the knee so it looked a little bit more connected. A few color passes here and there for the legs, and it was complete. I created Peace Accord. This Pokemon, since Marimba was said to have created the first instruments by transforming weapons of war into them. Hence, no fighting type moves while she's on the field. The shiny is partially based on her original color scheme I came up with. I'll admit, she was a pain in the ass, but damn it, this is one of the best legendaries I have ever done. Plus, I need more sound type legendaries. That's absolutely a necessity. And grass type, now that I think about it. Skyveilus, the Celestial Eye Pokemon. To say the original version of this Pokemon was the worst legendary of the region would have been valid. Hell, this Pokemon benefited the most from the Dynasty forms I gave them in the Legends Carthenu expansion. Go check out that video for more context. I used a lot of that form change to help redesign this godly bird. I reposed this Pokemon, making it a 3/4 view, and I brought the legs down. I removed the bands around the ankles after some feedback. The legs were getting a little too crowded, plus it helps makes the Dynasty form look even more unique. So win-win. Since the OG palette was so damn faded, I made a lot of the colors a lot darker, mainly the central blue of the body. I made the sun and moon pattern on the wings overall smaller. I simplified the design a touch by removing the light blue accents on the hips, and I made the feet overall bigger. This is no longer the worst legendary of the region, or at least the gap isn't so wide anymore, anyway. Stormer, the Storm King Pokemon, the next member of the Desert Trio. This needed to change the least out of the entire trio by a wide margin. For starters, I flipped the design to help iron out any of the perspective kinks I found. I opened up the mouth a little bit more after some feedback, having it lick its chops and give the Pokemon a little bit more implied personality. I made the hair a bit more curved overall, hoping it'd feel a little bit more natural. I made the beard and the end of the tail a bit more 3D at the ends. And that's about it. Sorry there isn't much to say about this Pokemon. It was the best of the OG trio for a reason. Osolaris, the Underworld Pokemon. The most disappointing design of the OG region. I wanted to give this Pokemon some much needed aura in the redesign since it's the head honcho. So I tweaked the design to make it feel even bigger than it actually is by tilting the body back so the wings look like they're coming forwards. I also chose to draw and light the Pokemon from a low angle. I thought that helped. I made the waist more defined since the original was lacking in any sort of depth, spreading the tassels up front and the bandages in the back outwards for a nice fanning effect. That took a while to get right. I made the scepter arms a lot more 3D, which took a lot longer than I want to admit. The bandage wings took a long time. That was easily the hardest part of the design. I shrank the head a bit more to make the Pokemon feel even bigger. Lastly, I made the colors across the board more saturated, mainly the gold and the purple. Oh, I haven't said it, but the shinies for the Desert Trio didn't change in any meaningful way outside of some saturation and hue shifts. I'm a lot happier with this trio now, especially with the inclusion of Marimbeat as the mediator for these idiots. Alright, that's another region reboot under my belt. I know I say this a lot, but I mean it every time. This reboot was so much fun. Granted, I had my fair share of headaches when doing it, but all the new Pokemon and fixing past mistakes, it just gives me joy. The next region reboot won't be for a while, since I have big plans for the Mihan region reboot. If you enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe. Hit the bell icon to stay up to date for all future uploads. Down below, let me know what your favorite new addition to the Zenya region was, and what your final in-game team looked like. Next time, we head back to Gotham for another installment of Fakemon Specials. This is Austin, signing out.